were doing was so clearly intentional, communicative, beautiful movement, and what else is dance but that? So, and then the amazing thing was, as soon as I dived in and tried to interact, as a dancer, as if I were in a jam, I got this amazing, reaction from the dolphins that would, turn with me and dive with me, and so I was like, this is dance, it took several years though of, working with different pods and training myself to get to a stage where I felt like I could actually show it to other people as dance. But so that was a period of about 5 years, I guess, of personal research before it became a project 2 years ago. And Ben has been really working with me from the beginning of when it became a project. So you saw him in the clips where we have 2 human dancers. So he's had a crash course.
So I thought it might be fun to just have you guys ask questions. What it takes to do this.
I have a whole bunch of questions. When you were down, and also the same for you, did you find different personalities among the dolphins, or could you actually distinguish them from one another?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think often we think of dolphins as dolphins are XYZ, and this is just like saying, humans are XYZ. When you go out there, there's, first of all, there's only a few dolphins that you're going to constantly see, even if the pod is 100 or, hundreds. There's only a few that are interested in playing with people in the first place, so that's part of personality right there. And then there are always a few that you kind of recognize because they always like to get really close to you, or, like to swirl around but not really close to you. Some of them like to play games. And then there's also age differences that you can see. The younger dolphins, they don't have as much patience to make nice, beautiful loops with you. They kind of just go crazy, and scream and make a lot of sound, and the mom or the babysitter comes in and sort of rounds them up.
And sometimes mom will actually try to show them.
Yeah,
so
sometimes mom is the
you'll have mom kind of doing a very nice job of moving with the humans, and the baby's just kind of just behind, kind of following and kind of trying to figure out what's going on.
Then the babies are suddenly very coordinated.
Yeah,
because following mom.
I think one thing that's really interesting, Chisa mentioned that we're developing a feature documentary, and one of the reasons why we think it's a great opportunity to make a feature documentary is there's a pod in the Atlantic which has been observed for about 30 years. They approached some divers 30 years ago, and they're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And a research scientist and a couple of boat captains have cultivated a relationship for a long period of time. And as a result, and in part through some modern scientific work doing using their feces to identify who's who, they're actually really well known. They know each of the individuals, they know their relationships to each other. And as a result, we can deliver a really interesting story about who each of these dolphins are and what it means to meet them and dance with them this way.
Yeah, Dolphin Diaries by Dr. Denise Herzing. Herzing, H-E-R-Z-I-N-G, has a lot of these amazing stories about wild dolphins as individuals. This is the researcher that Ben mentioned. So,
is a pod like a pod is a traveling neighborhood of dolphins, and they always hang out together. So really, this pod, this pod exists, and this pod.
And that's a really great question. So from the different studies, field studies that people like Dr. Herzing have done with the spotted dolphins, Dr. Norris has done with the spinner dolphins. Dolphins have what's called a fission-fusion society, and it's humans are like that too, right? We have our best friends, and we have like different little circles of friends that we hang out with. But then there's also bigger communities, right? Like the whole, corporation that you work in, or the whole neighborhood that you live in. Sometimes all gather together to do certain things. And the dolphins are also very much like that. They have alliances, they have friendships that last for their whole lives. Mothers and offspring are often, very close for their whole lives. But they shifting alliances.
They're like friendly tribes in a sense, because there's a family component to it, meaning that mothers with their offspring in most cases. So there's a lot of relatedness, but they're not exclusively related. I mean, dolphins will come and join, and also move out to join other pods.
So, but did you want to address the question about horse individuals and horse personalities?
Actually, that's a huge issue. Part of the horsemanship training that we've done is literally an entire course in horse personalities and horse behavior. And it's a very crucial part of how you interact with a horse, and actually it has deeply informed my teaching. So they're very dominant horses, and then they're less dominant, and often in combination with less confident, but not necessarily. They're unconfident horses, confident. They're introverts, extroverts. They're horses that are very right brain and very left brain, and then how all that sifts out in combination makes for different strategies in how you approach using them and working with them and communicating with them. The ideal horse for what we do would be a left brain or really thinking horse that you can tell when they're thinking, and they're going, oh, that's interesting. I like to do that. Very playful, very extroverted. Not all these horses in this particular herd were left brain extroverts. In fact, I would say probably none of them were. Now, some of that is partially that they haven't been asked to do a whole lot. So working with a left brain extrovert, you really need to keep them interested, and they can get bored very fast. So you have to constantly change the subject. On the other hand, if you're with a right brain horse that gets fearful very easily, you have to take it slower. Distance, the amount of distance you need between yourself and them with a left brain horse. If it's an extroverted horse, it's very different. Left brain introverts can be dangerous because they're sort of storing up information. Right brain introverts are particularly dangerous because they're reactive. A horse isn't a predator, so they're not going to actually, very rarely will they strike you, but they will bolt very fast when they become fearful, and that's 1,200 pounds moving very fast, and not always necessarily worrying about whether they step on you. I would say most of the time they really don't want to step on you. I've fallen right in the path of a horse and have it gone around me. They really don't want to step on you. But when they're frightened, when they go right brain, they're in a reactive mode. So a lot of what you're seeing is the ability to interact with a particular personality and their different strategies. And then the personality of the horse can start to shift in a situation, and you have to be able to change your strategy very fast. So a lot of what we're doing is intuitively responding, assessing, redirecting. And so the improvisational dance, and mind you, it's often done with very set choreography, has to be subject to change at any moment so that you're modulating your phrasing, changing your spacing, giving a horse a moment to just stop. Stopping and just reassuring them, then going on. One of the advantages of having live music is that Jamie could adjust to us. Because durations have to be very, very expandable. So that's pretty different from the circus, where the trainer pretty much knows at this point in the space, I'm going to ask all the horses to pirouette to the right. And they actually will learn the choreography. And the problem with that is that they'll probably want to get it done faster. So they can easily speed up, or they'll jump to the piece of the choreography that's the hardest, assuming that then it's going to be over. So seriously, that's actually a huge issue. One of the equestrians whom we work with is a dressage rider, and she's trained her horses to do this kind of fancy Spanish walk. And Spanish walk is always at the end of Valiente's training session. She always does it at the end. So she leads Valiente out on the lead line into the arena. And on the way to the arena, he's going, how about this? Because if I do this, then maybe I'll be done right away. One of the big things that we have to do is you never rehearse anything in order, ever. Now this is huge, so that, yeah. And I found this out with the circus because I would go watch Big Apple when they're at Kennedy's, at Lincoln Center, and they never rehearse the whole sequence. They only do parts, and they don't necessarily do them in order, because the horse will learn it. And then they are in a state of rote behavior, or what we call in the studio memory time. And we work very hard to be actually performing in real time, even in the dance studio, so that we're training ourselves to be able to be now. Rebecca with the gray streak in her hair is talking about really having to be present at every moment. So a lot of the rehearsing we do is actually training the humans to dance in real time and not in memory time, which is a fascinating thing.
I just think everything you said is so interesting because I've spent most of my life working as a solo dancer, and that kind of sensitivity that you want to have, you need reacting, but without having a horse is something that you work on. And I never used to rehearse my dances in order to keep myself fresh, and it's so interesting to do that. What I wanted to ask you is, when you finish working with a set of horses, do you miss them? Do they miss you? Are they changed? Like, do you talk to the people that own them, and are they forever changed from working with you all? Because I just can't imagine after going through such a sensitive experience. And I think Rebecca said they do this all the time. We're new to it, but I was just wondering.
A great example is this past summer we were at the Bates Dance Festival, and we made a new piece, much more ambitious than this. We learned so many lessons. I don't know if you noticed, but early on in the film, there was a black lead line and there was no metal clip, and then later you'd see these big heavy metal clips. The metal clips weigh a lot. Just rehearsing for 8 days with all of that equipment on their faces, we learned to lighten up. And the piece we made this summer, which was almost all horses riderless, we had 2 white ponies. One was very right brain introvert. You'd get near to Lupin, he'd go, oh. And then you had Oliver, who was a right brain extrovert, left brain extrovert, and he'd just go, hi, how are you? Got anything for me? Any treats in your pocket? And he would literally be scrounging. And we spent an incredible amount of time with these 2 ponies, and I think Lupin is forever changed. I mean, I'm in contact with the owner. All the owners have become friends of ours. We work all over the country, and this was up in Maine, and she actually was hoping that the 2 dancers that worked with Lupin and Oliver would take them home. She said they really need that kind of loving attention all the time. So yes, they are changed. And they're more comfortable very often, and more responsive to playfulness. So yeah.
As you probably know, animal studies is this really growing field, and it's exciting to see you guys at the forefront of that. I commend you for that. Yet there is this opposition, and I wanted to know if you had ever engaged in a dialogue with an individual or an animal rights organization member who maybe opposes this or has thoughts of their own and difference with their views.
I haven't actually come across anyone like that, but we are very careful to work with the dolphins, really on their own terms. We're very cognizant that we're going into their homes, literally, and so we try to be as cognizant as possible, and the proper dolphin etiquette. We try to be as observant as possible to pick up, what is the right dolphin etiquette, what things we should or shouldn't do to disturb them. Obviously, if they seem annoyed or if they just seem like they're not interested, we don't try to engage with them. So we haven't come across anything like that.
The only reason we're able to do this is because the dolphins are interested. They come to us in order to experience this kind of interaction, and when you're moving with them eye to eye, which is most of the time we're dancing with them, we're actually we're kind of staring at each other in the eyes. That's the point of contact, because there's not so much touch really. There's just this kind of open communication that's going on, and you're looking into their eye, and they're looking back at you, looking just as like amazed that there might be an intelligent person inside that funny-looking primate, as you are looking into their eye, going, "Wow, this is really just like looking into another person's eye." And so it's a very it's collaborative. That they're the ones who are interested.
I think maybe the only level where there might be objection. There have been studies, that show this kind of tourism where you go to swim with wild dolphins can change their behavior. They never come out and say it's bad, but they say, they don't come to the same bay anymore, that we have an impact. And it's kind of, it's like, well, maybe it's not that good. But because of that, we're very careful actually not to say exactly where we shoot things so that we aren't promoting the tourism.
We're also careful to make it clear that these kinds of interactions happen because the humans are quite trained. This doesn't happen if you just jump off of a boat and start swimming. So as not to encourage people to get the idea that they can go and experience this if they just pay their couple $1,000 and chase after some dolphins on a boat.
I think there's a lot of cruelty in the horse world. And the trainers whom we work with are incredible advocates of compassion for horses. Those of you who've seen the movie Buck, Pat and Linda Corelli are from that same genre of natural horsemanship trainer. They're actually quite well known in the horse world. I think that it's not about you. It's just not about you, the human. And yet, even so, I have to say that there are many times, especially with this piece, where I really questioned, here we are humans wanting to make a performance with horses. They didn't sign up for this experience. Are we, actually, Christine, are we making their lives better? And I have to say that in the piece we just made up at Bates, I think we had a great time with those horses. I'm not sure about these guys, although she did ask us to come back, and we made a completely different piece the next year. We never put a line on the horses, ever. I mean, you do in rehearsal, because you have just time where you're just with them, and you're trying to get them to understand your language, but you're never pulling on them. You're simply guiding them. It's very, very gentle. What would be called a phase 1. We'll use a phase 4 if it's necessary. But the piece we made the following year in 2009, the horses were completely at liberty. And in fact, it was the humans that were really at peril in a way. And the choreography was even more subject to the vagrancies of equine behavior. It was a fascinating lesson, but I do ask myself that a lot. And it becomes a very important part of how we construct the notion of the piece and even how we go about making it. Horse time is very, very limited. You do an hour, you're done. You have to rehearse everything else yourselves. You have to come in knowing what you're doing. And you really have to put in the time to just hang out with them. So that the minute you walk into the arena, they don't go, oh my God, there she is. We're going to have to work. There's actually real hangout time. And we did a clinic in June with one of our dear friends who's a trainer. And the first thing he walked in with all equestrians at this clinic, and he's a big bucket of chocolate. And he started tossing the chocolate out. And he said, come bearing gifts. There's got to be something in it for them. And I had always thought treats was a bad idea because they'd be scrounging in your pockets. But actually, if you know when to give the treats and reward them, they actually need a reward. And just saying good boy isn't necessarily enough. But you can bridge the giving of the reward, good boy. And after a while, they actually associate the treat with what you're saying. That's part of the learning process for them too.
I'm curious about how you actually shoot the video. You know, where you position the camera. You know, what, especially underwater. I'm assuming that the cameraman needs some special training, and maybe needs to be a dancer too. I don't know, but even with the horses, I'm thinking it's another person element. And you're sometimes in your shooting, you seem very close. Although I don't know if you're zooming or, you know, are the horses, do they have to get used to that element too? Or do you have to plan that out a lot because you're covering a big area, and you're trying to make something beautiful and not just, you know, just a big wide shot.
I do want to say before Chisa answers, I think that the person who shot her underwater footage knew more about what she was doing than any filmmaker has known about what we do. And there's something to be said for the camera being able to really understand the shaping in space. And because horses travel so much and it's such an enormous amount of distance, frequently there's a removedness and a square frame about how it's shot. And we've yet to find somebody, and Gabe was the closest, to get in there with them. So I'm curious to know.
It's hard to move the camera fast.
Well,
Yeah.
you also have to get out of their way. And I do want to say that if there's someone standing around with a camera, that's a perfect excuse to just stop and go, oh, that's so interesting. And then they stop moving. You know, dolphins move to survive, right? Horses stand still and graze to survive. It's not their choice to be moving a lot.
What about having a lot of cameras spread through the field and having...
We did this summer.
Yeah.
And I didn't bring that footage, but we did. And actually, but I would love to hear about how you did.
I mean, that is a very astute question because,
it is.
first of all, the underwater cinematographer, you know, has to be an excellent free diver.
We're talking minutes.
Is he on snorkel too?
No,
He's
just
not
snorkel.
diving? He's not scuba diving?
Sometimes, I mean, you know, some of the footage was shot on scuba,
Nothing we shot
but
today was on scuba.
nothing we shot today. I mean, sometimes they will, but I guess nothing we shot today, what we showed today was on scuba. They are often,
Free diving too?
they are often
Preferably it's on snorkel, because otherwise bubbles.
because the bubbles, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
are really, you know, so, and, you know, although they've never necessarily seen dolphin dance between humans and dolphins, you know, they've both been people who are very familiar with dolphins and dolphin movement. So, you know, they have to have a bit of a sense of, you know, how the dolphins are going to move. But part of the choreography, once you get a camera person in there, becomes, you know, how can we guide the dolphins towards the camera? You know, how can we enter the frame and, you know, guide them in a sort of way in front of the camera?
That makes it sound a little more manipulative maybe than it is, because they actually automatically include,
Every person. That's
well, they kind of know who's connected to whom, because they're constantly aware of that in their own society. So who's moving together, who is having some kind of, even, you know, subgroups inside the pod. And so when they see a camera person who's constantly following what other people are doing, they instantly start to think, or they just instantly recognize that this is an ensemble. And so they will actually try to include the camera person in the figures that they make. They're largely the choreographers when we're down there.
So do you get 30 seconds at a time, or so the cameraman, he dives down with a big breath of air. He's got this camera. He's trying to move through the water, and then you're hoping to get into some position where you guys are doing something in the frame.
So the dancer's job, I mean, not to, but the dancer's job is to maintain a relationship with the dolphins. So it can be however long they're interested. It could be, yeah, and the camera person. But it really has to be, because if you lose the relationship with the dolphins won't be interested anymore. They will move on. So you're having a relationship with the dolphins, and that can go on for hours.
So going up for air is part of it. It's not a break.
That's right.
That's right. You're not just like trying to do a shot and trying to do a shot. you're having a relationship and the camera person is moving around trying to capture the moments of that long-going dance that they can capture.
Have you experimented with everybody in the troupe having cameras that are like fixed to, like, you know, those little ones they glue on to, you know, on creatures, the critter cams that are kind of glued on the back of your head, or I mean, it seems like you could get interesting footage of if everybody had one, you could cut. You know, I mean, it might look a little goofy, but it would be kind of cool. You could get some really.
We've tried the GoPro thing, you know, those little things, and they just move around so much. It just gives people like
the video that was damaged was a rider riding without anything. You know, the course was cantering, and she had the camera in her hand, so she was actually filming that.
That's really
In our project, we're really dedicated to the quality of the film.
Right.
We really, for us to give people the experience of being underwater with them, we keep trying to just work with the best possible cameras we can, which is why we started working with these IMAX quality red cameras underwater. So ultimately, the kind of look that we're striving for is something that can be projected quite big and kind of precludes using small cameras that make people nauseous.
Right.
I guess I have a question or maybe a comment. What I find most interesting is the way you describe interacting with the dolphins. I guess I wish that I could see more of that in the film. The film was like these very quick moments of an interaction, and then we edit, and then it would be another interaction. But what's interesting to me is the way you describe how the dolphins would come to interact with you. And I don't know how difficult or easy it would be to get like or if you've thought about that, to get the storyline of that. I mean, in the beginning of one of the films, they showed you're swimming, but then the next thing is then there are the dolphins. So it would be more interesting for me. I'm kind of not an MTV sort of quick edit. I kind of like that process where, you know, you see it fluidly in continuous time. To see the interaction happen. I'm sort of biased. I have lots of cats at home. My idea of a good Saturday is to watch the cats and how they interact, and I can watch that all unfold.
We wish, you know, all audience members were as patient as you, that we could, you know, show lots and lots of footage of just, you know, that covers long distances of, you know, the instances where we're just kind of hanging out, like you say, you know, and getting to know the dolphins on day after day, you know, session after session. You know, we end up kind of compressing and distilling what happens.
What we showed here is a dance film, so it's meant to end up kind of telling a kinetic story, sharing. But you'll be welcome to come see the documentary that we're going to
I would love
we'll have
to.
plenty of space to actually just show how the relationship gets formed. We come back with, you know, hours and hours of footage that we have to kind of take out the really dancey moments.
Well, I guess where I think I was trying to go with that thought was that sort of maybe that continuity would help give, you know, the clues to the dance element to it, and maybe also address, you know, sort of the other political concerns, or actually to me what is dance is about interaction. So if there, you know, if you had more of that, I was seeing it, but it all happened very quickly. And then if I just like, how do these two beings come together, and what's inspiring their movement, their behavior, this formal arrangement.
We really look forward to answering all those questions when we have like 90 minutes to really